Good afternoon, and welcome to this post-employment benefits listening forum. This is a follow-up from the forum that we had in the fall. I'm Calvin Moore, and will be moderating the session today. We have a number of panelists who will participate in the presentation, and I'd like to introduce them. First, immediately to my right, is Randy Scott, who is Executive Director, Talent Management and Staff Development in the Office of the President. Then Dwayne Duckett, who is the Vice President for Human Resources in the Office of the President. Nathan Brostrom, and recently departed from campus, is now Executive Vice President, Business Operations in the Office of the President. Gary Schlimgen is Director of Pension and Retirement Programs in the Office of the President. And then Mel Stanton, who is Associate Chief Investment Officer in the Office of the President. Marion Gade is Chair of the Council of UC Retirees Association. And finally, Bob Anderson, who is Professor of Economics and Mathematics on this campus and Chair of the Faculty Welfare Task Force on Investments and Retirement. So in the fall, we had a visit in which the general introduction to the issues. The task forces have gone back and contemplated all of the input and considerations, and will now be presenting some options for consideration. The presentation will last about an hour, and I hope that there will be a vigorous discussion with Q&A following that. So without any further introductions, I'd like to take Randy Scott, who will lead off.
Okay, thank you very much, Cal, and good afternoon. Can everyone hear me clearly? Good. We're going to spend some time today picking up in our discussion from last fall, and at the same time providing you with some insights as to what the task force has been dealing with regarding the scope of specific issues on funding, finance, pension, and retirement health benefits. The spring forum is a continuation, as Cal said. We have on the website UCRP Future the fall presentation for those of you who were not able to be present. There's a full presentation with a narrative about the background of these issues. And we felt that we wanted to pick up with that framework, and we will provide you with a little bit of an orientation on some of those issues and then talk about some of the more specific areas of consideration by the task force. We will do that by starting with the funding and financing issues, which have been a key driver in these deliberations. It's not been the sole driver of the deliberations, but a very key one. That will be then framed and buttressed by a major focus of a lot of our conversations over the past several months, and those are the talent management issues. And unless you be confused by that, it's about the impact of any benefit changes on the people, the faculty and staff of the University of California. And there are several issues, including a recent survey that has been completed that will deal with that, and we'll provide you with some of the highlights of that today. By the end of this, we will have covered the scope and work of the task force to date, the specific range of options that we are actively discussing. We'll talk in some detail about next steps and the timeline. As many of you may be aware, this task force was formed last March of 2009. It has indeed a steering committee, several work teams, pension, retiree health, and finance. We engaged in the fall forums. There have been numerous work team meetings during this period of time. There's been broad and extensive consultation, which was the charge by the President when he formed the group, that we have a robust communications and consultation process. And we have indeed more recently completed a survey that does indeed capture and reinforce some of the issues that we felt were important. The spring forums are going on this month. They actually started at the tail end of March, and they will continue and wrap up on May the 3rd at Santa Cruz. And after that period of time, we will post the official presentation with a brilliant narrative being given on the website, UCOP website, and that will be the official summation and forum presentation for this year, for this phase of the work. There are work team meetings scheduled during the month of May, steering committee meetings that will be held. We are due to present to the president of the university recommendations in June. This is one of those great moments in service to the university that you don't have to make a decision. The task force has been asked to give its informed recommendations to the president, who then will make a determination as to which of those recommendations will either be reviewed by the Board of Regents and discussed by the Board of Regents or set aside. But in any way, we are anticipating a discussion, a public discussion about the work of the task force, its recommendations at the July Regents meeting. Then a decision will be made post the Regents meeting, we assume, to release the full report with all of the background that led to the recommendations of the task force. Throughout this process, there has been very active involvement by members of the Academic Senate. And very recently, beginning in March, we undertook a more formal consultation process with the Senate, and that will continue not only through the rendering of the report, but as you know, UC stands for what? Unending consultation. So we know it is not the beginning and it's not the end. It may be the end of the beginning kind of thing, the Winston Churchill notion. But there will be a lot more discussion that will follow about the recommendations or about how we should proceed and under which order and sequence. So there will be several more discussion periods, we know, going forward. It is useful to start with what is not changing. As we did this presentation earlier, beginning in late March, we had this slide buried in maybe slide 10 or 15 in the deck. And people said, well, if you'd have put that up first, I would have listened to the rest of the presentation. So we decided to put this up front to frame what we are doing here so that no one is confused. And there are several points to be made here. First of all, pension benefits for current faculty and staff that have been accrued to date cannot be modified, changed, or reduced in any manner. Similarly, earned pension benefits by retirees, those who are currently retired, cannot be modified, changed, or reduced in any way. Now, can we take a collective sigh of relief? All right. Now, we are talking about options that will indeed continue a defined benefit program here at the University of California. There is this grand narrative that got started last year, and we still get occasional uprisings about it. Well, this is nothing more than an elaborate ruse to really discontinue the defined benefit program at the university and institute a defined contribution plan. Nothing has been further from the truth. The President charged us with considering, and we have, all kinds of approaches to these benefits. And so defined contribution options have been discussed rigorously and debated within the task force, and it has been largely set aside except for one request that we will highlight to you as we go through the presentation. Next, how many are emeriti faculty? How many are active faculty? Okay. Now, for the emeriti faculty who are here, you will not be asked to contribute to the UCRP program when active faculty during this next pay period start their contributions again. That, too, has been a point of continuing misinformation that somehow we were going to go back and ask retirees to start contributing to the pension plan. That is not true. And please pass that word on to all of your other retired colleagues. In the area of retiree health, we are talking about ways to continue offering retiree health benefits, not discontinuing them. And the basic program of eligibility, if you are already retired, will continue. We know also something else is not changing in the near term, and that is the continued pressures that the University of California will face that have been largely induced by the state budgetary pressures. We wish that it was otherwise, but it will indeed influence us in many ways, and it has particular weight in this discussion because of the lack of state funding for pension contributions by the state of California, a matter of which we will get into in some detail, but only stop here to highlight the fact that this is not something that we should just sort of passively accept. We have a very aggressive, we can't say lobbying, advocacy program that is going on at the state level, and we're asking all retirees, all active faculty and staff to participate in that process through the UC advocacy program. There's a link on the UCOP website, full information about our budgetary requests and what the process is, how you can communicate with your representatives. And I hope that as an action step coming from this meeting today, if you have not become a part of that process, that you will at least go look, and if you decide to elect to do it, that you would indeed become a part of being an advocate. There will be an advocacy day on the 27th next week, and that group, and then everyone who signed up for that will have an opportunity to advocate for UC. This is, some people would call the boilerplate, but it also has a bearing on the discussion today. OGC, the Office of General Counsel of the Board of Regents, requires that we at least state some of these things, and we want to do that from a fiduciary and legal standpoint. First and foremost, under the terms of the pension plan, UCRP, all of your benefits accrued to date are protected, something that I just highlighted. It's called the vested rights doctrine, and it's true for the state of California, or public pension plans here in the state of California and elsewhere in the country, but particularly here. The plan does reserve to the regents the right to change future accruals of pension benefits for current faculty and staff. That is an issue or a provision that has not been legally tested, but it is a part of the written documentation of the plan. Pension benefits for pension and retiree health benefits for new hires can be changed, and we have done that historically at different periods of time. The most recent was a change in eligibility for new hires for retiree health, and on January the 1st, 1990, we began the program that we have today of graduated eligibility for retiree health. Retiree health benefits are not vested in the same way that we describe as pension benefits being vested. So changes have been made in retiree health in terms of eligibility, plan design, and premiums over a period of years. They are not the same as the UCRP benefit. So to talk a bit about the funding and finance issues, I'm going to call on my colleague, Gary Slimjan, to come up and talk about that a bit and highlight what we've been doing. Gary?
Thank you. So I get the exciting part of the presentation today, so if you can turn on your cell phones, we can all stay awake. All right, so financial and funding issues. Excuse me. So this is these benefit plans, especially the retirement plan, especially pricing it at zero, has really fueled UC's growth. But it's time, we're in a contributory environment now. We're restarting contributions this month, April 15th on the employer side, and May earnings on the member side. So we're back in a contributory environment now. And we need to look at these programs, the pension program, UCRP, and the retiree health program, sustaining them in our current and our future economic environment. So you can go down. So the first thing we want to differentiate right up front is that the pension plan and the retiree health plan are separate. So within the UCRP trust, there's $32 billion of assets as of last July 1, up a little bit with good market returns the past few months. And all of that money in all of the segments of UCRP, in the campus and medical center segment, in the Los Alamos, Livermore, LBL segment, all of the money in the UCRP Master Trust is available to pay benefits. And UCRP benefits are paid from this trust. Retiree health benefits are not paid from the UCRP trust. While there is a separate trust for the retiree health program, there's no pre-funding, and it's separate completely from the pension plan. What we've been doing historically for the retiree health program is we have been assessing every department at every campus, every med center, the DOE lab. We do a payroll assessment or a tax of $3.12 currently for every $100 of covered pay. We collect that money, and then we put that through the Retiree Health Trust for consolidated financial reporting, and then we use that money that we collect from the departments to pay the premiums for UC medical and dental coverage for our retirees and their dependents. So they're separate. Excuse me. So this is the same slide that we had in the in the fall presentation rather, and the last November Regents meeting. This shows the growing unfunded liabilities when you look at these two programs together. And this is as of last July 1. So let's start with the pension plan, UCRP. The actuarial accrued liability, and this is on a smooth basis, 95% on a smooth basis last July 1, 71% on a market value basis last July 1. So this shows smoothed. So the red bar there, what's happening because the red bar is increasing is that the normal cost is adding about $1.3, $1.4 billion of liability onto the UCRP actuarial accrued liability to date. And the normal cost is the additional liability incurred from all active members for an additional year of service credit. So the red bar is increasing every year by about $1.3, $1.4 billion in liability for that additional year of service for active employees and the active faculty and staff. Every dollar that you pay out for a retiree releases a dollar of liability. So the red bar is the increasing liabilities from the normal cost. And the normal cost, again, is about 17% of pay. And we are restarting contributions, but we're starting at a total of 6 rather than 17. 4% on the employer, 2% in aggregate for faculty and staff. So we're digging a little deeper hole here. We're not fully covering our normal cost yet. But when you look ahead with UCRP, bless you, when you look ahead with UCRP, the assets are declining, one, because we're rolling in unrecognized losses from prior years, because this is a smoothed market value or smoothed actuarial value of assets. But this declining funded status of our pension plan is occurring even though we're building in employer contributions going 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, even though we're building in employee contributions, faculty and staff, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're building in a 7.5% annual earnings assumption. Even so, our plan is set to decline dramatically unless we can fund the plan at a higher level sooner. So what's shown here then is the growing unfunded liabilities of the pension plan, and then you add on top of that the current retiree health program. In the retiree health program, there's a similar valuation that's done. We look at all the retirees and all the dependents that are receiving a UC contribution to medical and dental. We look at the actives that are earning eligibility. We look at the actives that have earned eligibility. So if there was no changes whatsoever, to the current program, the retiree health program alone is about $20 billion in unfunded liabilities by 2014. When you add these two together, $40 billion. So that's been a primary focus of the finance team on the workforce to look at these fundamental funding issues with these two plans. A couple elements of the retiree health program. When you take that $3.12 and collect it, the aggregate amount is about $242 million per year that we're collecting from all the departments that we then use to pay the medical and dental premiums for our retirees and their dependents. If we made no changes to the program at all, that would be increasing to about $450 million per year due to medical inflation and growing numbers of retirees. Another element of the financial picture for retiree health is the balance sheet obligation. Because we're not pre-funding the program, we have to report on the university's balance sheet the amount of our non-pre-funding. So the cumulative amount, it stands at $2.3 billion right now. If there were no changes to the current program, it would hit $10 billion almost by 2014. And in the long term, the growing balance sheet obligation could impact our credit rating, our ability to borrow, the unrestricted net assets that the university has. So this is just one more element that is in the mix of the financial side of these two post-employment benefits. This slide was provided by our Office of the Treasurer. Shows a couple things. There's a lot of debate looking forward on what is an appropriate earning assumption for our assets in UCRP. It's currently 7.5. But if you look backwards here, this chart shows the market value of assets historically, and we've done about 8.9% annualized over the past 20 years. And this is the market value of assets now. So we're about 73 cents we have in assets for every dollar of liability in the pension plan. And then this blue line shows, had we been making contributions the entire time at our normal cost, what our funded ratio would be today. It'd be significantly higher. Had we been continuing to make contributions the entire time, we'd be at just shy of 125% funded today. Now, of course, there would have been issues with still collecting money from the state, from the Department of Energy when we were so super funded, but this chart illustrates in large part not that the return hasn't beat our assumption, but that the lack of contributions for the past 20 years has put us in the place that we are today. Another thing to say about this slide is the PERS and STRS, they take the money from their contributions that they get from their members and their employers, and they turn that right around and they pay the benefits with that money. UCRP has been different being in a non-contributory environment because we've had to maintain liquidity, sell assets, because we're paying out about $1.5 billion a year in benefits to our retirees from the pension plan. All right, we'll talk briefly about the current Regents funding policy. They have a policy that targets 100% long-term funding, and it's a total policy contribution level. The funding policy starts with the normal cost, about 17% of pay, and it adds a 15th of the unfunded liability on top of that. And that's the policy. Separately, the regents are determining what the actual contribution rate will be. So there is a policy amount of over 20%, but the regents have determined to start, it's 4 and 2 for a total of 6. The actual amount is going to be determined based on the availability of funds, the impact of member contributions, on the competitiveness of total remuneration, and collective bargaining as applicable. So the regents have only set the employer rate and the member rate through June of 2011. They need to reset both rates on, for July 2011 and later. That's a focus of the task force. So here's our most exciting slide. Do you like it? All right, get some applause. So this is the funding policy we just talked about. So we're at 20% right now. That's the policy, the funding policy level that we should be putting in the plan. And if we were putting that amount of money in the plan every year, or as the amount shows, 20%, 27%, 30%, then looking ahead, assuming the money is coming into the plan and assuming that we earn 7.5%, that this is the amount of money it would take under the current policy to keep our plan 100% funded over the long term. It rises and stays above 30% of pay. Here's our normal cost. This next bar here is the current approved contributions 4 and 2. And then again, increasing the employer contribution by 2, increasing the employee contribution by 1. So if we continue with this very slow ramp up, there's going to be a big gap of the shortfall of the projected contributions versus the policy contributions. And if we continue on that very slow ramp up, then every year that the actuary goes in and calculates, well, what should your policy contribution level be, it arches higher and higher and higher to 50% of pay. I mean, if you look out in the outer years, $10 billion in total covered pay, half of that would need to go into the pension plan. I mean, it's crazy numbers. So you end up creating an additional shortfall because of the slow ramp up, if that were to continue. And just to look at, one dimension of this, if you look at just this number right here, 2014, the employer contribution right there, that's $1.3 billion just with the slow ramp up. And that's the equivalent of the salary and benefits of 15,000 staff employees. That's the equivalent of the salary and benefits of 7,300 tenured faculty and their benefits. It's the equivalent of the operational expenses of 2 medium campuses, the revenue of a medical center, and the state support for 103,000 students. So we're starting at a real low level to fund our plan, but it needs to go up significantly, and the implications are profound. So when you look at, the active members of UCRP today, less than 1/3 are funded in any way by the state of California. Fully 2/3 of our active members are funded by our medical centers, federal contracts and grants, the Department of Energy, self-supporting enterprises. So what we're really focusing on right now, because you can't charge a federal contract and grant a benefit cost unless you're charging all the fund source at that same benefit cost. So the idea right now is to get the state up to as high a level as we can so that we can bring in the other contributions from the medical centers, contracts and grants, et cetera, to bridge that gap so we can start getting in, rather than 4% from the med centers, get in 10. And one of the suggestions that the Academic Senate has made on this is to look at UC issuing pension obligation bonds to be able to bring up the state amount of money, the state contribution level, so that we can get this other money coming in. And I'd like to turn to Nathan to talk about the pros and cons of pension obligation bonds in our context.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, as Gary said, this is one opportunity that we are actively looking at and exploring for addressing this significant gap we have. Pension obligation bonds are taxable bonds that are issued by state and local governments in order to fund or to pre-fund all or part of the unfunded liability for either pension or retiree health care. So if the university were to issue pension obligation bonds, we would essentially be exchanging one liability, our unfunded liability, for a different liability, and that is the annual debt service on pension obligation bonds. In mid-March, the Academic Senate did submit a formal request to President Yudof, which has then been forwarded to the regents, recommending issuing approximately $4.5 billion of pension obligation bonds. And this slide shows the impact of that amount of bonds on our operating budget. In this scenario, we have them issued in a layered serial fashion, basically taking the difference between our funding, our proposed funding level, and the policy funding level that Gary had shown, and issuing them over a series of 12 years. And you can see that when they're fully issued, this would amount to $324 million annually in our debt service, or roughly 8.41% of our payroll. And again, this would have to be layered onto the normal cost of the pension to get the full impact on the university. Of course, issuing this kind of debt comes with trade-offs. Right now, the university has about $8 billion in long-term debt outstanding, and we believe that we have about $6 to $8 billion in additional capacity before it would start to impact our credit rating or our ability to borrow. And so this would be a direct trade-off against a lot of the other borrowing needs, seismic upgrades, deferred maintenance, new construction around the campus, around the campuses. So what are some of the advantages to pension obligation bonds? Well, Gary mentioned the main one, which is if we are to issue these and put them directly into our trust fund, we immediately start using that money as assets, and we're also able to get a 2-to-1 match from the medical centers, federal research, and auxiliary enterprises towards that. One other advantage is that we're able to structure the debt in a way to give us some budget relief. So we could do it in a way that gave us some cash flow relief in the earlier years and backload some of the debt later out. And finally, there is a possibility of cost savings or arbitrage. We'd be issuing these at about 6% in the taxable market. Remember, these are taxable, not tax exempt as our capital construction bonds are. The long-term proxy we use for our return on investment is 7.5%. Over the last 20 years, we've earned nearly 9%. So by having that money to work earlier, we get the benefit of the compounding effect. What are the downsides? That is probably the biggest downside, is that we have no guarantee that we would earn 6% on that money, and then that could be an additional drag on our operating budget. Right now we don't have a source of repayment for that. We can't use state funds to repay those bonds where we can use state funds to pay our normal cost. And finally, it does result in a certain loss of flexibility. It basically hardens the obligation. If you have an unfunded liability, you can choose which years you put in more or put in less, reflecting the general financial state of the university. With debt service, you can't. I mean, that is an obligation that you have to pay regardless of your financial status. Nevertheless, this is something we're looking at very closely, and will probably be part of any recommendation that comes out. A couple of things I would note: we are also actively advocating with Washington, the Treasury Department, the Obama administration, to see if we could issue at least a portion of these as tax-exempt bonds. That would give us a tremendous financial advantage, and frankly, it's a situation a lot of state and local governments find themselves in, and we are. Given the current state of the state budget, we're also actively talking to the state about taking a promissory note if they're not able to give us cash for the contribution. So even if they're not able to pay us cash, we have accepted promissory notes from the state that we can then use to leverage the 2-to-1 investment.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Paul, come on in. We do have talent management considerations, the impact of how these, I knew him from Berkeley National Laboratory, in case you're wondering why I said come on in. We have a number of issues that impact the people of the university as we've been working our way through these topics over the past several months. And to highlight some of those considerations, I'm going to call on Dwayne Duckett, who is the Vice President of Human Resources. Dwayne.
Thanks, Randy. A good amount of our discussion and what prompted the larger discussion around the pension programs has to do with finances. But I wanted to make sure that throughout this process of consultation and getting feedback and talking to various groups of our people here at the university, that we highlighted the fact that there is one reason and one reason only to offer these types of programs, and that is to add value to employees that enables us to hire and retain the best. And the bottom line is that it's easy to cut programs and get to a point that we have no intrinsic value to them. However, as evidenced in some of the results that we'll cover with you from a survey that we recently did, these are benefits that are very valuable to employees and that are held near and dear to many at UC, and a good reason why a lot of people join and a good reason why a lot of people decide to stay, and we want to highlight that. The key considerations going forward for effective talent management are the following. One, we want to continue to reward long service with the university. We also want to make sure that we recognize the value that this benefit has to the faculty and to the staff. And we also, someone's calling. We also want to ensure that these programs are sustainable into the future. So really want to highlight any of the potential changes that you're seeing are aimed toward making sure that these benefits are here to be able to be taken advantage of in the future, not just simply to cut costs for the sake of cutting costs. Let's talk a little bit about the survey process now. We did a targeted online survey around post-employment benefits exclusively and targeted around 18,000 faculty and policy-covered staff with these written electronic surveys. We got back a 23% response rate, which is actually quite good for this type of an exercise. Yes, believe it or not, 23% for this type of thing. People to actually take their time out to actually do this. And the key point with that is that it remains a statistically significant example out of the amount of these that we sent out. We also did an open survey online at which anybody going onto the PEB website could, answer some questions in terms of how they felt about post-employment benefits. Now, out of these two vehicles, we ended up getting responses that were remarkably the same on terms of how people valued benefits and how they felt about them. The full survey report will be online shortly, but next I'll get into some of the highlights of the survey. Here's what people had to say, and we thought these were some of the more telling points. Post-employment benefits are among the top reasons why people come here. People make a conscious decision to take these jobs, join our faculty, with the consideration that they are going to have these in the future when they decide to retire. It's a heavy consideration. The next item was the most stunning for me personally, only being around UC for 11 months now. It was stunning to find that 80% of people actually agree on something within the university. And a powerful statement in that, we have a very diverse population, very diverse set of opinions, but this is one area where people generally tend to agree on in terms of value and importance of these benefits and are satisfied with them. 73% of the people taking these surveys said that they plan on spending a long career with UC, and we categorize that as 20-plus years of service, which is exactly what we were trying to achieve when these programs were conceived and what we're trying to achieve going forward. And many people place a higher value on post-employment benefits than even they did against cash. Currently sort of mapping out at 69%. Saying that they would rather have more in terms of retirement benefits as opposed to cash compensation, which is also a very different orientation than a lot of organizations. Next, we'll talk about a little bit of the market alignment issues that we have and where post-employment benefits relate to how we stack up as far as total remuneration. As you can see, we have a variety of areas for a variety of segments of our population where we are behind with regard to cash compensation. Going back to the point that I made a little bit earlier in terms of people consciously making that trade-off, we see that that's there. However, we do see for certain groups that we are behind at a level that makes us uncomfortable. Whereas with regard to post-employment benefits, you can see that we are significantly ahead looking at our comparators. In some of these instances, the question that we'll be asking going forward is, does it make sense to strike more of a balance between the relationship of things like cash, retiree medical, and pension programs to get more in alignment, or to make a conscious decision to keep these ratios the way that they are? But I thought it would be important to point out that market alignment and balance is something that we will continue to ask questions about and how it affects the workforce going forward. Next, we go through the same type of example with regard to the medical enterprise. And as you can see, a concerted effort over the past 2 or 3 years with regard to aligning cash to the marketplace more closely and post-employment benefits more closely to the marketplace has achieved some results, so it's not an impossible task. You'll also see that in some instances that we remain very, very far ahead with regard to some of our post-employment benefits That's primarily due to the fact that a lot of hospital-type enterprises, medical enterprises, run on defined defined contribution programs, and also don't tend to offer as much with regard to retiree medical. Going forward, again, as Randy mentioned before, and we can't emphasize enough, the primary considerations going forward are for a defined benefit scenario. Defined contribution, with the exception of some inquiries that we've had with regard to the medical enterprise, are not a realistic possibility for us, and we haven't spent a lot of time discussing them recently. So it looks like the DB recommendation is going to continue to stand out and go forward. We also stand out with regard to these benefit programs. If you go back to the other charts looking at the fact that we're 400% ahead of market or 500% ahead of market, and that people emphasize these as a primary reason for coming to the university and staying with the university, I think that's a position that we want to maintain. If we want to maintain that sort of leadership position at the same levels, let's say instead of being 500% ahead, we make an effort to be 200% ahead, is something that we have to consider and figure out whether it affects our talent equation. So considering scenarios that are sustainable going forward, we have to be rational, we have to look to strike a balance, and we have to not only worry about current considerations for retention, but in terms of keeping the talent pipeline for the university going. And again, this starts and begins with people, starts and ends with people. The one reason to offer these types of programs is to make sure that we're getting and keeping the type of people that we want in the workforce. We've heard from many of you with regard to how you value these benefits, and the university has a strong commitment to making sure that we have the right types of programs going forward to keep the university as great as it is.
Okay, thank you for that, Dwayne. Now we're going to talk a bit about the actual process and options. This slide may be familiar to you if you were here in October. There is a complete description of the task force, its membership. There's a cross-section of people. I recognize it looks like it's OP heavy here today. OP is not just leading this. We have a cross-section of faculty, administrators, and staff who are part of this process and working on the steering committee as well as the work teams in pension, finance, and retiree health. The charge to the task force was to be sure that any recommendations that were brought forward did indeed go through kind of a sieve of analysis. And these are the various dimensions that we're looking at, these options that we're going to be describing further to you. And there are implications amongst all of these, but these have been actively a part of our work. At the end of the day, the recommendations that are indeed submitted to the President are trying to enable and allow the regents to do two things. First and foremost, to meet their fiduciary responsibilities, particularly in the area of pension, and to meet their educational responsibilities in terms of the mission of the university and for the people of California. If we miss on either one of those with these recommendations, then our work is for naught. For new hires, for new hires, for new hires. I just want to be sure that we're all kind of right in the same spot, okay? We know in pension design that there are certain levers or program features that do indeed drive large portions of the design cost, no matter what the pension design may be. These are not all of them, believe me, but they are some of the key ones. Age factors, the maximum payout at the time of retirement, a cost of living adjustment, and then, equally important, the level of contributions to the plan design itself, and then what indeed you're trying to do from a finance standpoint in terms of its total normal cost. In the center of this chart, you see the features, if you will, of our current program. You are eligible to retire at age 50. We have increasing age factors up to age 60. Under a new tier defined benefit plan for new hires, we are looking at a range of options that would change those dimensions. First and foremost, we know on average that staff retire at age 60, 59 to 60. We know that faculty never retire. No. That faculty on average retire at age 66. And so the question, as we look at the larger issue here, is should we be trying to encourage people to work to later retirement ages so that when they do retire, they're more closely integrated with Social Security from an income replacement standpoint, as well as being eligible for Medicare. And so in the course of this discussion, we have looked at issues about age factors and minimum ages and talked about age factors ranging from 1.5% under this new defined benefit tier up to 3% at age 65. Similarly, we do not take into account today income replacement as it relates to Social Security. The last chance that people had to opt out of Social Security was 1976. And so as we talk about new hires, should we be considering a lower maximum contribution from UCRP, because we do know that income replacement of Social Security is higher for large portions of our staff? It's a question. We have a cost of living with a cap of 6% today. Maybe that should be at 5%. And again, a different kind of formula with the CPI. Today, we've talked about extensively, Gary did, about the slow ramp-up of contributions from both employees, faculty, and staff, as well as the university. Should we, under this new tier, immediately start a new hire at the level of employee contributions of 5 or more % to cover the cost of the program, and similarly, the university contribute its full normal cost for that employee at the time of hire? The new tier that we're describing here is a defined benefit program. A defined benefit program. The clinical enterprises, the medical centers, for competitive reasons, have said they would like to have a defined contribution plan available to medical center staff because that is more competitive in their marketplace, and it would be based upon choice. So we are looking at that issue and analyzing how that approach might apply to the medical centers. Our total normal cost today is 17%. For this new tier, the total normal cost would be targeted at 12%. The key thing to be understood here is a new pension plan design does not lower the accrued liability that we currently face, those charts that we were talking about earlier. They do have or could have some effect on long-term normal costs, but it does nothing to remedy or to get at the solution of the prior graphs. Now, considerations for current faculty and staff. For current faculty and staff. One of the issues that we are actively discussing is a faster ramp-up of contributions for the reasons that have been earlier outlined from both the university as well as faculty and staff. And there are implications from a total remuneration standpoint that you saw highlighted in some of the prior presentation, and we'll talk about a little further. Also, should we be offering a choice to current faculty and staff between the two defined benefit tiers on a going forward basis? It's a question. Also, we are actively engaged in stakeholder discussion within the task force of the risks and impacts of saying for current faculty and staff, these new tier benefits will apply to you on a going forward basis for future accrued service. Now, why are we talking about this at this time? Because that was the charge to the task force, to look at all aspects of these programs, to have fulsome discussions about them, and then determine the recommendations around them. So in full disclosure, not to hide anything, particularly here at Berkeley, we needed to say this. It's not a secret. We are talking about it. Would it be a final recommendation is yet to be determined. There are any number of risks and impacts we know from in terms of managing and the impact on current faculty and staff if something like this were done. But again, it has been a part of the discussions. Now let's take a look at retiree health benefits. This doesn't say for new hires. Why not? Because new hires are not a part of the liability for retiree health. They're not here. It's us, current retirees, meaning emeriti and staff, and all of the active employees, faculty and staff of the university that constitute that liability that we were talking about earlier. So any changes that we are discussing in the retiree health area would apply to retirees, active faculty and staff. And the range of options here are some of the things that I'll outline next. Primary drivers that we know of in this area are issues such as the eligibility age for retiree health, the years of service, and the level of employer, meaning university contribution, to cover premium costs. And so in this particular case, to align with this new tier of defined benefit plans, we're saying maybe we should be talking about a different minimum age of eligibility in retiree health. And maybe that age should try to encourage people, again, to get closer to the Medicare eligibility. And that if people retire earlier, between ages 50 and 55, they would have access only to our health care plan. And by that, we have a working example in the vision benefit. Who pays for the vision benefit? We do. Who's we? Retirees, emeriti, faculty and staff. What does the university do? We have a group rate that is substantially lower than you might find if you went on an individual plan, but the benefit is paid for by the retirees. That's the working example of what we mean by access only if between those ages. We have looked at any number of iterations of what would be the minimum university contribution when you get to 10, 20, 30 years of service, different than what we might be doing today. We also know that the level of employer contribution for benefits, for retiree health benefits, have a direct cost as well as a reduction in liability effect in terms of these programs. So we have looked at, again, should we be phasing in a lower level of contribution by the university, and what would that mean for retiree health net premiums? They would increase gradually over a period of time. We know that given the range of this discussion that our overall liability would decrease by several $billions, and the range right now is somewhere between 9 and 10 billion, and that the actual cost of these kinds of programs going forward would be roughly 3 to 4% of payroll versus our current nearly 8% of payroll costs. Now, one of the issues that has been discussed as we go back for just a moment, you notice it says phase in blended or unblended. And what's that about? It's about this. Today we know that non-Medicare retirees, those who are retired, not eligible for Medicare at this time, do indeed cost more, and as a result, their plan experience or claims experience is blended in with active faculty and staff. It's called an implicit subsidy. It's not new. Everybody does it. And I know in this day, when you look at Wall Street, that's not a good thing to say, but, but everybody does this. One of the issues that has come to the task force as we've looked at the range of issues is should we be rating or asking the carriers, our insurance carriers, to quote premium costs by these cohorts, active faculty and staff, non-Medicare retirees, and Medicare retirees. We know the effect of that would be to slightly decrease the premium costs for active faculty and staff. We know also there would be a substantial increase in net premium costs for those non-Medicare retirees. So we're weighing that. Will it be part of the final recommendations is yet to be determined, but it is an issue that has been and is being discussed. Now, if we're to undertake changes for retiree health benefits, and they will indeed affect current faculty and current staff, then maybe we need to take some additional areas of review. And one of the areas that has been of active discussion is grandfathering, meaning allowing a full section or certain portions of the population to be exempted from the change, to stay in the old program of eligibility on a going forward basis. And we're looking at the possibility of some combination of age and service to do that. For instance, if your age and service is up together, combined to 50, or you have a minimum of 5 years of service, you would stay in the current eligibility pool. But if you don't meet that threshold, then you would be applied under the new eligibility that we're thinking about or being discussed. Now, that would not be true for the level of UC contribution. Everybody would be impacted the same there. But the eligibility for retiree health would shift. There's been a question that we've discussed about pay bands. We know that when people retire, if they are in employee pay band 1, they pay a little more. If you're employee pay band 3 or 4, you're paying slightly less. Again, should we have distinct pay bands for retirees? We have a cohort of over 1,500 retirees who are ineligible for Medicare. Why? Back in the 70s, 76, 77, they made a conscious decision to elect not to participate or contribute to Social Security. And as Medicare eligibility rules have changed over time, they are now forever out of that program. We know that they are going to be joined by another actively working cohort of about 2,000 people. And so the question before the task force is, because UC retiree health benefits are their only retiree health benefit program, they don't have Medicare, can't get Medicare, should we be setting and assuring that this group somehow is protected against any future changes in retiree health benefits? And we're looking at various options on how that might be done. Should they be rated with the Medicare retirees? Should they be rated with the active employees, or something in between that? So that is being actively reviewed and discussed at this time. There are any number of ongoing risks for any of the changes that we've talked about, particularly for the pension plan and those elements that we've highlighted here today. And we know that any of these changes are going to be subject to the collective bargaining process, so just take that as a given. But in addition to that, there are other risks, and I'd like to have Bob Anderson, if he would, this time to comment on those.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I very much appreciated Dwayne's comments, and I wished that some other members of our task force had been here to hear them, because as you can imagine in the task force, there's a tension between people on the financial side who look at these things as being very costly, and people on the human resources side who say, yes, but we need these in order to retain and recruit the people we want to have at the University of California. And one of the false choices that we could make in this is to say, okay, we've got a problem with resources to fund these programs, so let's make them less generous. And if the result of that is that a large fraction of our most talented workforce walk out the door, then we have not benefited the University of California. I want to emphasize that there is active consideration of applying the changes in the pension plan to future service of current employees. There's no decision been made to do that, but there are certainly people in the task force who are actively advocating that. How would that work? So suppose you had someone who is currently 45 started working at age 30, and they plan to retire at age 60. They have 15 years of service credit right now, and they have the right, when they reach age 60, to draw a pension based on the current terms of the plan. So 2.5% of their highest average plan compensation times the 15 years of service they have now times times HAPC, where the HAPC is computed at the time they reach age 60. So in other words, you get to apply current terms and current service credit to your salary at the time you decide to retire. However, this 45-year-old now retiring at age 60 might have to compute the other part of the pension for the 15 years of service left based on the new terms, which might be substantially less generous. So someone might get a blended pension partly on the current terms and partly on the less generous new terms. Who does this affect? Well, I'm 59, I'm okay, but it really affects our colleagues who are 40 to 55. Really affects them in a severe way if, in fact, that's where we end up. And I really want you to understand that there's a potential to seriously undermine our ability to retain, especially faculty, who are at the age where we're most vulnerable to losing them. And that's something that, in my view, has not had sufficient attention within the task force. I'm very grateful that Dwayne is bringing that up in an aggressive way. And the Senate members of the task force have also been constantly stressing that. There are also legal issues here. So it's asserted that the regents reserve the right in the plan documents to change the benefits for future employees. And that's true, that the plan documents do in fact say that. Whether or not that gives the regents the legal right to do that is unclear. There's a plausible legal argument that the regents would advance, and a court might accept it, but it's not in any sense guaranteed that a court would accept it. Public employers in California generally cannot change the terms of their pension plans once people have been hired. So the university would be arguing that this clause it put into its plan fundamentally changes the constitutional protections that state employees have with regard to their pensions. They might win, they might not. I can assure you that the litigation would be ugly. I think the regents currently are not the most popular group in the state of California. And I tend to think a lot of that's unfair. Okay, I don't really believe that the regents have done all of the bad things that the San Francisco Chronicle or the public thinks they've done. But I can assure you that after this litigation, the public opinion of the regents will not be more favorable than it is now. And I think it would be a grave error for the university to go down that route.
Okay, thank you, Bob. The voice of reason, all right? But again, what was the charge to the task force? Talk about everything. And we've been doing that in various levels, and we'll continue to do so. So there's also another issue that's highlighted on this particular slide that I'll quickly touch on. It's about workforce segmentation. We do currently have segments within our UCRP trust. You know that. There's a segment for the laboratories, each of them. There's a PERS segment that's in the trust currently, PERS plus 5. And so the question for this new DB tier, that is a segment. That would be a different segment, all in the same trust. It's not different funds or what have you, but being invested under our investment policies. But as we've said, we also have issues such as the collective bargaining process that will, by definition, create some segmentation, and it will raise questions about equity and fairness. i.e., we are all beginning our contributions when? Now. Is there any active faculty member in the room that doesn't know that? Good. I asked that question at another campus. It'll go nameless. And 3 or 4 people put their hands up, and I was shocked. Really? Yes, we're doing that. But we've also had to collectively bargain with the unions and have all but one major union on board. But going forward, as we start to increase the levels of contribution, everybody in every union is not going to join hands and sing Kumbaya. People are going to resist, and that we will have some different starting times, and so there will be a question. Well, if those folks are not contributing at the same level with the rest of us, should they get the same benefit? And part of what our collective bargaining strategy has got to do is to begin to address that over time as we engage in that process. So again, when you hear workforce segmentation, some of it may be an operational decision, some of it may be doing the regular processes and procedures that we have to engage in. Now, there's been a feeding frenzy in the news about public sector retirement benefits. All kinds of things, newspaper articles, media features on NPR, maybe some of you have seen it. There's an excellent study by the Pew Center for the States that's called the $1 Trillion Gap. And if you haven't read that, it's an excellent, excellent piece of research work. In summary, the kind of what public systems are doing. We've had a number of studies talking about these gargantuan unfunded liabilities, so much so that the governor commissioned a school that is south of us that has a tree for a logo to give graduate student insight into this issue. Many flawed assumptions and interpretations in that document, but we won't go there. There have been specific actions by other state and public employer entities around the country around post-employment benefits. We must understand one key thing. The University of California is somewhat different than other public sector plans. Why? Because of our constitutional status makes us different. And while we might be informed about what other state pension systems are doing and learn something from that, I don't think that we can wait for them to find solutions to come up with the things that are going to be responsive to our needs. So we have, through this task force, the President's appointed this task force, taken a leadership position on this issue. There isn't any other public employer out there that has spent the last year and a half talking about this in an informed way and trying to come up with options that will indeed sustain its approach to this issue going forward. And that's not unusual for UC. We all know that. But it does put us in a kind of an awkward place that we get painted with the same brush of everyone else. But we are slightly different in a different place here. And we're not playing catch-up for once. Isn't that wonderful? We're leading on a particular issue. You've heard about this. National health care reform. I can absolutely guarantee you that there are any number of people here in Berkeley and elsewhere who can absolutely, conclusively tell you every absolute interpretation of what the new health care bill does. And they are completely misinformed. The point is, there haven't been implementing regulations and procedures around the bill. They're still working through and beginning the rulemaking process on many of the provisions. We do know that some things are going to happen earlier than others, but I think that in order, before we get all stirred up, we need to take a breath and kind of wait to let this unfold. That doesn't mean that we should just be passively letting it go by. That's not in our nature, but we should be actively monitoring and trying to figure out. We have the good fortune to have a former member of the UC faculty who's now an assistant policy secretary, Richard Croning. And that gives me great hope that there will be a voice of reason in the room when they get ready to talk about the practical consequences of what healthcare reform will mean. So we're going to be monitoring this closely. We don't know the specifics of how it's going to impact us, but we'll be looking at it. Here is our timeline again, just to remind you, recommendations to the President in January, in June, not January. This is not a lifetime appointment, thank God. And a report to be released in July with discussion with the regions, and rigorous and thorough ongoing academic Senate consultation as part of shared governance in this process. This is a series of the websites we've talked about. UCRP Future, it's kind of been our website for the past year. You can go to that website, many have, to ask questions and get responses, frequently asked questions, background on a lot of these issues that we've been talking about today, and fall's post-employment benefits presentation being online as well, and we will be posting the survey results. There's a link here to the Regents meeting in November. Every November, actuarial reports on pension and retiree health. They make wonderful reading, particularly with a glass of wine. If you really want to get the highlights, the first few pages are an executive summary, and if you really want to get into it, maybe a second glass of wine, all of the working details. The total remuneration study is there, and Dwayne talked about that a bit. It was released last fall. It has a fact sheet, 2 pages, or you can go for the full report again, 132 pages of how we have looked at the UC workforce and demographic in our comparator groups, both academic institutions and large employers. And then there's some excellent reference pieces at the Academic Senate website, one of which was highlighted today about the pension obligation bonds, another on investments in UCRP, and then the author being present, a lump sum cash out and market volatility. Bob Anderson wrote that, and it's an excellent piece of guidance to people who are considering that option for their pension. So we've talked enough. We'll now take your questions. There aren't any. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you very much for that very informative presentation. And we'll take questions. If you go to the microphones on either side, we'll alternate back and forth. So go.
Yes.
Turned on?
I think it's on.
Hello?
Yes, it's on.
My name's Michael Ranney from Education, and I had a question regarding total remuneration and recruitment and retention. I've actually shared with Bob Anderson, but I thought it would be interesting for the entire task force to to consider. And that is regarding the question of Roth 403Bs and Roth 457Bs. It's not clear to me why the university hasn't adopted them yet, because it seems like they're a good idea. There's and I guess I'd urge the task force to consider it. Some of my colleagues who've left prior institutions have done those conversions. It seems like this is a pretty critical year for this to happen, given the tax situation in 2010 specifically. That is, the income limit for conversion is gone. The tax rates will increase in 2011. You can defer the tax hit to 2011 and 2012. I'd also point out that that the university sometimes tries to increase our apparent or real remuneration one way or another, often by what I consider sort of throwing bones, like a health spending account that is incredibly laborious to actually administer on the parts of the people who have to do it. It's really not even worth the money in many respects. And I think that it's worth considering this in terms of recruitment and retention in keeping good people. And I guess I'd urge you to consider this, and I guess I want to know why the university hasn't done it so far, because it doesn't seem that difficult to pull off.
All right, thank you. And we have had some work in the past on the Roth, and I appreciate your comments on the flexible spending accounts and some of the other observations that you've made. But I'll ask Gary to talk a bit about the Roth approach.
We have had some requests for a Roth 403B, some for a Roth IRA, not a lot, but we have looked into a Roth 403B. It's not an issue at all with our master record keeper. They can do that quite readily. It's more of an issue with our payroll programming. And we have spec'd out the amount of work that it would be. Payroll would need to, adjust the 403B amount or have an employee be able to adjust the 403B amount during the year pre-tax or after tax at their discretion. So that's really the hurdle right now for us internally, is to get the payroll programming done. It is not something that we've ruled out, though. I mean, we are still evaluating it. It also adds a dimension of complexity to our communications around our defined contribution plan. But it's more of an internal issue, and payroll has been very preoccupied with the furlough programming, the restart programming, and other priorities, but it is still under active consideration.
Okay, thank you.
If I could address
Yes.
part of that with regard to the payroll difficulties. Many of you may be aware we are actively looking at changing our payroll systems in order to get more up to date to accommodate these types of issues. Of course, as with just about everything, there's considerable costs and a lot of work associated with that, but for the reasons that Gary raised and the types of programs that you're talking about, having a modern, up-to-date system would give us the flexibility to seriously be able to look into implementing the types of things that you're talking about. That project has been underway for about 8 months now. We're getting to the point probably by this fall to come up with some initial recommendations in terms of which way to go. But just for perspective, we have literally hundreds of different ways of actually applying and administering payroll throughout the UC system, whereas most organizations have one, maybe 2 or 3. So it is a big task. We're trying to pull everything together, and the reasons that you mentioned in terms of being able to have more progressive programs and make sure that, quite frankly, people's payroll amounts are being handled appropriately and assigned to the right types of accounts are one of the big reasons to make the investment in it.
Well, I'd like to point out that it could make as much of a difference of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars for some retired individuals. So it seems like a non-trivial enough venture to try and get it done in 2010.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Mary Camario from the Department of Architecture, and I have a question and a clarification, really.
Yes.
In your presentation about the health care benefits, you mentioned a cohort of 1,500 not eligible for Medicare because they elected not to be in it. But your slide had something on the order of 10,000.
Oh,
and I'm curious, does that include people who have chosen to retire at age 60 and they've got 5 years before they're eligible for Medicare? And so my real question is, if that's the case, what are the issues affecting those groups? I mean, I'm in this cohort, and if I'm thinking about retiring in the next couple of years, I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen to my health benefits in that range. And so I think that's something that I think people who are older, who have been here a long time, may be less focused on some of the plan benefit issues, but are very worried about the health benefit issues because there's so much uncertainty around health benefits right now.
I understand. Well, just to be clear, the slide that you saw was that blended and unblended grouping, and we have about 10,000 non-Medicare retirees, meaning that because of age, they are not eligible for Medicare. So they will be, but they're not there yet. They have retired or drawing a benefit, but are not right now currently part of our Medicare program. Correspondingly, though, we have a smaller cohort of actual retirees who are over age 65 that elected not to back in the mid-70s to coordinate with Social Security, and they are thereby ineligible for Medicare, even though they have reached the Medicare eligibility age. And we know by looking at our current demographics, we're estimating that there are probably another 2,600 or so out of those who are not coordinated, who are currently working, who will fall into that same cohort. So those are the numbers that we're talking about.
So I was just saying, you talked specifically about that one group, the 1,500, and I'm hoping
Yes.
that somewhere in the discussion there will be some discussion of that other group and what happens to them.
Yes, and that's where we're talking about the blended, unblended issue. And i.e., if we unblend them, that group's premium costs will indeed escalate substantially. If we don't do that, if we leave it as we currently do, then they would see a different effect, and we are actively discussing that.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your question and comment. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Chris Rosen. I'm a professor at the Haas School of Business and also the co-chair of the Berkeley Faculty Association.
Yeah.
And on behalf of the Berkeley Faculty Association, we want to thank you for taking on this challenge. And we do see you taking a leadership role, and I think that's very important. And we recognize the enormity of the challenge that we're facing. And we are very concerned about the unfunded liability and what we're going to do about that. And we do understand that the longer we wait, the worse it gets.
Yes.
And yet we represent the faculty. We're concerned about the educational mission of the university, as well as our salaries and all the other things that have to do with faculty welfare. And we want you to know that we hear that you're perhaps doing this, hopefully you're doing it, that you are taking into consideration the possible unintended consequences of dealing with this challenge in a way that requires, if the state continues to refuse to come up with the money to pay the employer contribution, that forces the university to put that burden on the shoulders of students through increases in ed fees and on departments through staff layoffs and other kinds of cuts to generate those internal revenues. Yes. And that's, of course, a challenge. We're very intrigued by the idea of pension obligation bonds and appreciated the effort, the additional information that was provided today, because that's helpful in the pros and the cons. Okay. And because you're talking to a mere mortal here rather than Bob Anderson, who actually understands this stuff, part of the problem is that we don't fully understand all the details. Yes. And we want you to know how some of our anxieties are related to that. And we don't really know whether that $4.5 billion is the right level. And in fact, we want to challenge you, again, based on our ignorance. I know that 100% full funding sounds optimal, and it's my understanding that the region's 2008 funding policy actually envisions some sort of surplus, setting the rate high enough so that there could be, over 30 years, some level of surplus generated.
That's not really.
We can give a clarifying point to that. Bob?
Well, you might end up in a surplus position without having intended to get there if the market did well in 1 year. And so what the policy says is if somehow you got into surplus, then this is what you would do. But there's no intention to try to get to surplus.
Yeah. So one of our questions is, a lot of the union people, a lot of people are saying, well, why do we have to be 100% funded? Could we aim for, given the fact that even paying off these bonds the debt service will be costly. The money is going to have to come from somewhere. If we can't get the state to pay it, it's going to come out of our hides. Would it be what would be the costs and the benefits of aiming for something less than 100% full funding? We just don't understand that, right?
Bob?
80. If you aim at 80,
or
90
or 95%.
Let me talk through an example. You aim at 80. So in a given year, maybe you're at 75. And then what happens? The market falls by 50%, as it did in 2008 and 9, 2000 to 2002, 1987, the mid-70s. You have to be in a position to absorb a 50% decline in the market and not go belly up. If you're at 75%, given our current asset allocation, and this market drops by 50%, you lose a third of your value. You're down to 50% funded. And it's nearly impossible to ever recover from a position of 50% funding. Those horrifying figures like 37% contributions, think 70%, 80% contributions. You can't get out of it.
Right.
Well, and just to be very clear, though,
we understand,
if I may.
But we're not proposing 80%.
No, in addition to what he has just said, recognize that the Regents, the funding policy that Gary discussed here, it says that the long-term goal is to be at 100%. The long-term goal. That is the same thing that is being said at CalPERS, and they are substantially less funded than we are. But long-term, we talk about pension plans not in terms of years, but decades.
Right.
So over time, that's where we want to be.
Right, and you want to do it, as I understand it, in 15 years. You want to get up there. That sounds great, but there is going to be a cost, and we're worried about it. We're worried about it. The restart, you know, the 2 tiers, treating new faculty, new employees differently from existing ones. That's going to impact recruitment, not so much retention maybe, but recruitment. And we're thinking of the future, the long-term future. The long-term future is in recruiting people to replace us old fogies who are going to be going and becoming retired.
Yes.
And we want, you know, so we're in a kind of zero-sum losing game.
Well,
but
I hope that it isn't a zero-sum losing game, because that's been what the task force has been trying to avoid, to come up with a prudent set of approaches and recommendations that will avoid the kind of hazard that you're talking about. And at the same time, we have been profoundly focused on the unintended consequences of these discussions. We have had very active advice given to me personally as a staff director for this project that we should not be out here talking about this stuff to people in the spring season. Why? Because it's going to make people retire early or leave the university early. And we have felt that we do need to have an informed, continuing conversation to give a status report about our process so that it doesn't look like we went away last October and came back in June, and guess what? Here it is. I think that would be a horrible outcome. So my point is that at the end of the day, we are absolutely focused on that, and we are sensitive to it, and have tried to adhere to that understanding. So if I may, I'd like to go back to the other side. Thank you. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Chris Albert, and I'm a current retired employee that's under the non-Medicare Advantage program. And I know that you mentioned to another speaker that the premiums with the blended and unblended may rise, but I want to know if that's going to be the same scenario for people that are currently in that program. And I can receive Medicare at 65, which is 3 more years.
Well,
but will my premiums also rise drastically, as you said?
Well, drastically.
I thought that was the word you used.
No, I said substantially.
Oh, okay. I heard drastic.
There's a difference between drastic and substantial.
Okay.
The effect may be the same, but it sounds better.
Okay.
Okay. But let's, just to be clear, I can guarantee you, as a retiree, as an active faculty or staff member of the University of California, that just like the sun rises in the east, your premium costs are going to go up every year. I can guarantee that. The question is how much.
Yes.
And so we are taking a look at this cohort, ineligible for Medicare, to say how could we at least shelter them somewhat from the full impact of these increases. And I gave a couple of examples. Should we be blending their experience in with our Medicare pool? Or should we be taking them and blending their experience in with the non-Medicare retirees and active employees as an option? And we're looking at both of those right now. So that's ahead of us. The point is, we know that cohort is there. They will have others joining them. We know, and the task force has said, we've got to mitigate the impact of cost increases over time for this group.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
First, I'd like to thank you guys for this very informative session. My name is Kamesh Warpula.
Yes.
Mechanical and electrical engineering, computer science. I thought I'd ask a touchy-feely question because
Okay.
I'm from an engineering sort of
I happen to
background here.
like, you know, now this is remarkable. I am a undergraduate degree in Renaissance and Reformation history. Sounds like I'm an actuary or something out here. Here's an engineer wants to ask a touchy-feely question. Only in Berkeley. I love it. Yes, sir.
So, you know, some of the slides you put up are actually, you know, to be candid, quite alarming.
Yes.
One of the things that concerns me is the glacial pace at which public institutions, universities in particular, make difficult choices.
Yes.
2% startup. There's a glaring hole out there, you know? And it concerns me that, you know, we see a apocalypse coming down, and then, oh, we got to protect this, we got to be careful, we got to do this. And we make these things, and we are not reducing speed, okay? It really concerns me of our glacial pace. So just something to sort of,
Thank you.
you know, and sometimes one has to make hard choices and think like a corporation might deal with some of these things. Yeah. A question I had, you started with, you know, the legal thing, you know, that I forget the words, but what we've accrued, we're today,
benefits to date,
we're entitled to. You know, if I was an Enron employee, there might be similar language. Is it possible that the whole damn thing could declare bankruptcy?
No. Let me give you a case.
If there isn't the money to pay for these obligations, where's it going to come from?
All right, here we go.
Okay, so that's my question.
Here we go. And please stand if you'd like to. You may have a... Okay, all right. He wants to take the answer sitting down. Okay. Okay, fine. First of all, the university, as a public entity like the state, cannot declare bankruptcy. Cannot. I said the state of California cannot declare bankruptcy. There's no provision under federal bankruptcy law for a state to declare bankruptcy. Cities and municipalities, no, doesn't make any difference. It's still a liability. And in our case, the liability is such, it's a vested benefit. It has first claim on asset dollars of the university. And so, if we run out of money, what do? We sell other assets. And in some conversations, it's always another campus that I'm not visiting. But those would be the choices, and I'm very serious about that. We would have to talk about liquidating other assets to meet these pension obligations. They are not optional. They have, and that's when it's very easy for people to say, well, the Board of Regents and, you know, we ought to be this, that, and the other. At the end of the day, that is their plan sponsor and fiduciary role, to assure that there are sufficient assets to pay for these benefits. And we do it through the trust right now, but if the trust ran out of money, then we've got to find other assets to pay these benefits. Bankruptcy is not an option. Okay? Yes, sir.
Yes. Ed Epstein, International and Area Studies in Haas School and Vice President of the Emeriti Association.
Yes.
First of all, it seems to me your background in Renaissance and Reformation history is very appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if we're talking about a Renaissance, but we're sure talking about a Reformation.
Okay. That's fair enough. Thank you.
The question is this. In some of the slides, you refer to an unnamed comparison cohort. What's the cohort with which you were comparing various of the UC figures?
Well, we have a backup slides, emergency slides for some questions. Let me get to them very quickly. Okay, for the campus and medical, campus and UCRP. And we'll notice a UCOP, and you notice that it applies to, and for latter rank faculty, it's the comparator rate. If you look at the SMG and other academics, the librarians, it's the CPEC 26. If you go further, we have large in California employers for general staff and management, if you will, and the service workers have their industry peers.
Okay.
All right.
So for each of the categories of employees, then, the most relevant comparison units have been
that is exactly right.
used here.
And we've worked very, very closely with an advisory group of faculty welfare of the system-wide Senate in terms of rigorously looking at the methodology, the comparators, and so forth to do the total remuneration study.
Okay. That's very helpful.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Drew Doherty from Spanish and Portuguese.
Yes.
And my question is this. Is it correct, or am I dreaming, that if changes are forthcoming in retirement benefits, they will not affect the accrued benefits, but only those benefits to be earned after the changes go into effect?
Gary, would you like to answer that question?
That is the slides had talked about the accrued benefit to date being protected, but that there is consideration in the task force in looking at potentially offering choice going forward, to pay more for the current tier, pay less for a new tier. But any discussion about the application through choice or through bargaining or through anything at all about a lower tier prospectively for current employees is what's being actively discussed. So you are correct in that there has been a task force discussion that the prospective benefit for current employees could, through some combination of events, be lower.
But your accrued benefits today cannot be changed, reduced, or modified.
And any retiree has completely accrued their entire benefit. So no matter what we might be able to do prospectively for active employees, a retiree has completely and fully earned and accrued their benefit. They'll always have the UCRP COLA provision. They'll always have all of the benefits that were in place while their benefit was accrued.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. I shouldn't call on you, Yale, but thank you for coming this afternoon.
Thanks, Randy.
Yes.
So first of all, I want to add my thanks to the others that you heard. This has been incredibly useful. I want to stress something that Gary brought up, which is that a large portion of the problem we have has come about from the zero contributions over a period of time, whether it's the full 20 years or maybe the most recent 10 since the dot-com bust or whatever. We have seen this coming. The slow ramp-up is not going to solve the problem, and everybody realizes that. The comment made that we move at a glacial pace, I thought was exactly right on. It's not an accident you've been hearing that from the various faculty welfare committees for at least since 2006 that I've been keeping track, but maybe for longer. But I want to make two other points. One is that seems to me to then argue that we should look at where the money went. And the money that should have gone into funding the system went into the current operations of the university. Went into building, it went into hiring people, it went into my pay, it went into everything else that the university does, at least with the state funding part of it. And then because we didn't pay in for the retirement, we also then lost the federal matching and the health centers matching. So it seems to me that the appropriate solution is to look ahead 20 years with the exact same perspective, which is we've got to reconsider the size and shape of the university. And this is not a post-employment benefits problem. It's a university size and shape problem. What are we going to do? What are we going to give up if we're going to put more money into this? The dream that the state legislature will somehow fund our retirement system is just that. They may come up with the money, but they will just ID monies that would have gone to other parts of the university. And so we have to realize that the current region's building plans, the current expansion of, I'm in a professional school, so I can say this, the almost infinite number of professional schools coming down the line, law school at San Diego, a nursing school at Riverside, whatever. I mean, somebody's got to rethink a large number of those projects and plans and so on. Finally, the other point I want to make is that, unfortunately, not highlighted in the slides, it's there, but it's not highlighted, is the idea of taking the 100% salary replacement for people who retire with 25 or 30 years service and essentially knocking it down to 80%. That is not in and of itself bad because of tax rates and because of Social Security, if you believe there's any certainty in the world for Social Security and for future tax rates. And I think it's a big mistake for the university to say we're going to shift the responsibility to current employees who are under some age, 45 or whatever, and new hires to take that risk of what national policy is going to be, where for most of us in the room, that risk has not occurred. We have been able to say, no matter what happens with the crazy federal policies, we're still going to do all right in retirement.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you very much for those comments. Yes, sir.
Hi, Andy
Hi.
Packard from Mechanical Engineering. In standing here, many of my questions were actually answered.
Okay.
I think the first one was about, and I want to just clarify, it sounds like these benefits trump everything else about the entire university system. It can go, they take first priority over everything else. Is that a true summary of?
That's a true, from a financial obligation and liability standpoint. But right behind that, or right next to it, are bonding obligations that we have made, those kinds of things.
Okay.
So just know that there's certain financial commitments that we have made programmatically
Understood.
or operationally that we have to perform on, and we don't have a choice around that.
But in the sense of tuition, and I think getting to tuition, salaries, everything else is on the table, yet retirement benefits are not.
We have an obligation to pay you for work that you have done.
Okay.
Okay? So let's think of the worst case scenario, the liquidation of the UCRP trust, and you're still working here, right? And it comes down to a choice. Do we pay you for last week's work? And the answer is yes, we've got to do that. That's according to state law. But what about next week's work? Question mark. But do we have to send out a benefit check to every retiree in perpetuity? There ain't no question.
Well, worse
We've
than
gotta
that,
do it.
you have to commit to what you already told me who's not retired.
Yes.
And,
when you,
who never paid in.
I understand.
So what I am just a I mean, at some point, I look at what you're telling me and what I teach my child.
Yes.
And I've been here since '88, so I guess I paid in 4 years.
Okay.
And you're saying that me and people like me are basically going to bring down the system, or have the potential to bring it down, because of contributions we should have made, we weren't asked to. It's not our fault.
It's no one's fault.
Well, okay, and that's the last question. I looked on the web because when I started here, I didn't care about contributions one way or another. How did it come to be that contributions were stopped? And I cannot find a document that describes the process by which that happened.
Oh, there is a document.
Okay, I just
Yes,
said,
there is
I
a doc-
Googled it and can't
Yeah,
find
well,
it.
you have to go to the Regent's website and look in the archives, but there is a document. But I'll have Gary talk about that.
Just a quick.
You're
So
welcome.
can we go to the one emergency slide?
Which one?
Yeah, the funded status.
The funded status, all right.
Going down. So in this only shows the last 10 years, but the 10 years before that, when we suspended in 1990, excuse me, we were 137% funded. And so we were concerned that there would be a raid on our pension. And Governor Wilson actually raided the PERS fund, took $3 billion out, got sued, had to put that money back in. So, we were concerned about our growing surplus. We were concerned about the Department of Energy. They were questioning the amount of money that they had contributed, if that was an appropriate amount. So we continued in a very superfunded state for quite some time. We could see it trending down, of course. We approached the state about making contributions, but there were issues in 1990. We had built up such a big asset base, at that time. And then, Randy, if you can go to the investment slide. We had started with a really big asset base, and then the dot-com boom, we did 4 years in a row in excess of 20%. So, we were super funded for a long time. And so the regents in 1990 never thought that the cessation of contributions would last half as long as it did, but it did.
And tied to that is this ongoing issue that if indeed we stop if we come back to a state of overfunding in the future, and this gets to the other lady's question, then how should we handle that? Right now we recognize it in 1 year. We take the whole gain in 1 year. That's how we've been paying for our retirement benefits, right out of the trust fund. We got a gain, boom, pay the money. If we ever come back to a gain period again, the Regent's policy says you're not to recognize that gain in 1 year. You're to recognize it over a 30-year period of time. 30-year period of time. And additionally, there's been a task force or a commission that was appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger a few years ago about overfunded pension systems and what their policy should be. So the 30-year amortization is one component. The other is that should you still be so overfunded, even recognizing a 30-year amortization, and you have the choice as an employer to determine what you're going to do with your money, you should be pre-funding for your retiree health liability. Not taking money out of the trust or anything else, but rather than making a contribution toward pension, you should be putting it into your retiree health, which is a separate
entity.
Trust fund, and in our case, wholly unfunded,
Right.
as it is for most public employers here in the state of California. So we have policy, and it's great to sit here 20 years later and say, you know, my God, why did we do that? I would defy any of you to go back 20 years and say you knew exactly what you'd be doing today. No, we don't. We learn as we grow.
Understood.
Okay, so thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a staff retiree. My name is Judith Lothrop. I'm going to ask you a question that probably has absolutely nothing to do with your assignment, and maybe you can just label it as speculation. But I'm wondering about the, okay, so I can anticipate that my health benefit premiums are going to go up. I have money sitting in a 403B, and at some point, someone's going to tell me you have to start spending that. I know there have been programs where you get a tax break if you took up to a certain amount out of a 403B and gave it to a charitable organization. I don't want to give it to UC, but if I wanted to give it to my...
Why not?
If I want to give that to help pay my increasing premiums.
Yes.
Now, I don't think you know that, but maybe you have a crystal ball, or maybe you have sniffed something like that out in the wind. Is anyone thinking about that sort of technique?
Sort of what?
Of being able to 403B,
Okay.
non-taxable,
Well,
if it's going through for health benefits.
Okay, you've hit upon the magic acronym, MRD. Okay. Gary will talk about that now. Mandatory required contributions.
Thank you.
Distributions,
Thank you
excuse
again,
me.
Randy.
Contributions.
Thank you again. So yes, at a certain point, at attainment of 70 and a half, or a separation from service if later, there is a federal requirement that a minimum amount be taken out every year. And our record keeper sends out, notices about that. So that's a federal requirement. They suspended it last year, but it's back on for 2010. I am not personally aware of anything that's been looked at where you can take a non-taxable distribution from a 403B plan and use it for eligible medical expenses. I know there's been vehicles in which you can put pre-tax money away from salary for future use, but I really can't comment on anything I'm aware of that would allow you today to take a non-taxable distribution from your plan to apply it to your UC premiums for medical or dental.
You're saying you're not aware of anything today. I know that.
Right.
I guess that.
And we don't have a crystal ball that will give us any revelation either. Sorry. All right. Any other questions?
Let me take the privilege of asking a question.
Yes, Cal.
The revised or new tier plan looks and sounds a lot like the retirement plan we had in 1985, which people thought was pretty good. Could you comment on how much it looks like that plan from the past?
Not having been here in 1985, as some of you were, but Gary, do you have an observation there?
Is this the Tier 2 program?
Well, the
Tier 2?
80%.
Oh, the 80%. We did have historically a
The
plan limit.
The age factors peaked at what, age 63?
Right. And there's also the plan limit of 80%?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So there was at one time a plan limit of 80% where you could not get more than 80% of your salary when you retired. And that was amended, I forget what year, maybe
87 or
87.
something like
So
that.
now currently it's 100%. So you can, the multiplier at 40 years of service and 2.5% is 100% of salary. So you do max out at age 60 with 40 years of service, and you get 100% of your salary. But if your salary goes up, your benefit will still go up. So that was a plan amendment that occurred. The age factors have changed over the years too. It used to be 2.41 at 63, and then over a period of changes, it changed to 2.5 at 60. So we have evaluated the changes as we've done them. There's been a lot of Senate consultation each time there has been a change. And one of the things that's in the mix is looking forward, is it appropriate to look at still 100% or 80% or with Social Security? So that's something we're looking at, but we're also looking back at what has happened in the past too.
Are there, yes, yes, sir.
What is then, if the plan can change, what have I actually accrued? Is it years of service? Or is it, should I integrate the tables that have been published every year while I've been here and that I've accrued? So that's I guess the question. It sounds like things can change, and unfortunately we've always changed them, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, we've always changed them in the benefit of the retirees, and now we're at a point where we kind of need to change them, I'm talking about for people like myself, we kind of need to rack them back a little bit, but you're saying we can't do that. So what have I accrued?
Well, the benefit that you've accrued to date and all of your service credit to date, you've accrued that at the plan provisions currently in effect.
Currently in effect, or in effect each year as
No,
they were?
currently in
So
effect.
it's always gone up?
So let's do
So it's a maximum that I've accrued, basically?
Well, let's do a worst case scenario again, like Randy described, that there's an A plus B. And there's 20 years of the
Right.
original and 10 at the second tier. When you go to retire at age 60, you're still going to get the 2.5% applied to that first A, all of it. So that you'll forever have the benefit provisions in effect for the service that you've accrued. You'll always have that. That cannot change. We can't reduce.
You've changed the benefit over, you've changed it from, you said from 2.41
You
to
can't reduce it.
It can only go up.
You can
Right,
always
right.
make it better,
Oh,
Right.
okay.
but you
Right.
can't reduce it.
Right.
So it
That's
seems
always.
like this is a suicide pact.
Yeah, there have been. All right, I get your question now. Yes, every time that's made, every time a change has been made, it's always been an improvement. So.
And it has to be that way. That's a
No,
law.
you either have to leave it alone,
Okay.
or if you change it, the change it can't have the effect of diminishing your earned benefit in any way.
So is the change retroactive to initial hire?
No, it can't
No,
be.
it can't be.
Only from the date of the change forward.
It's only to the date of the change going forward.
Well, when
So
the-
we,
But
go
the
ahead.
increases,
When the regents approved the most recent age factor improvements, they approved it applicable to all prior service. For those that had not yet retired.
They didn't have to, did they?
No, they
So
could have done
again-
it different ways.
so it was retroactive.
Yes, but
The
again,
benefit
that was an
improvement.
improvement over any prior
Yeah, right.
period.
Improvements can be.
Yes.
It did not have to be.
It did not have to be that way, but they did it. All right. Noticing how the room is being vacated, Cal, I think that we're at the end of this, so I'll turn it back to you.
Again, on behalf of the participants, like to thank all of the presenters for, I think, a very lively and enlightening presentation and something to think about. So thank you and good luck.